So what happens when absolute neutrality just becomes mathematically impossible?
Right.
Like when the sheer overwhelming scale of a conflict guarantees that doing nothing is basically, well, it's just another form of participation.
Exactly. It's a fascinating question.
Welcome to today's custom-tailored deep dive, everyone. We have compiled just a massive stack of source material today.
Oh, yeah. It's dense.
I mean, we're talking intercepted military orders, anatomical observations, and these incredibly raw first-hand accounts of a journey across a continent that is, frankly, currently eating itself alive.
Yeah, eating itself alive is the perfect way to put it.
Right. And our mission for you today is to really unpack this brutally dark narrative, one that just strips away all the romanticism of war. We want to examine those blurred, smeared lines between, humanity and monstrosity.
And also that stubborn, almost irrational power of found family.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So to set the stage for you, the material we're analyzing centers on an environment that is functioning under the pressures of total systemic collapse.
Yeah, the world we are looking at is quite literally on fire.
Literally on fire.
It's buckling under this massive geopolitical shift. And, our lens for this analysis is a man who is genetically and psychologically really engineered to be a detached observer.
Right, Geralt, the professional monster hunter. A witcher.
Exactly. A man who operates under this rigid, highly self-imposed code of absolute political neutrality.
A code that, spoiler alert, is about to be systematically dismantled by the reality of the landscape he's trying to cross.
Oh, completely dismantled.
Because we're looking at a man attempting to navigate this apocalyptic war zone for a deeply, deeply personal reason. He's trying to locate and save his surrogate daughter, Ciri.
Right. And his fundamental operating procedure, working alone, ignoring the politics of kings, treating morality as the simple binary equation of monster versus human, it all proves completely incompatible with the physics of this war.
It really does. I mean, he insists he travels alone.
He says it constantly.
Constantly. Yet he continuously accretes this incredibly dysfunctional, highly lethal found family.
It's so ironic.
It is. You've got a flamboyant poet named Dandelion, a fiercely pragmatic archer named Milva, a company of deeply philosophical dwarven mercenaries.
Don't forget the barber surgeon.
Oh, right, the barber surgeon with this staggering understanding of human anatomy and, of course, a relentless, terrifying shadow from his own past.
Yeah, so the central friction of this entire deep dive really stems from that exact contradiction. Geralt is a man who insists over and over that he wants no part of the geopolitical struggle.
None at all.
But the gravity of the conflict continuously pulls him into its center anyway.
Yeah, so we have to analyze the mechanism of how that happens, How does a lone wolf, desperate to remain an outsider, inadvertently become the leader of a highly effective militant cell?
And a hero in a conflict he actively despises.
Right. So to understand how his neutrality breaks down, we really have to look at the economic and military machinery of the war itself.
Because it is not just armies clashing on a field.
No, not at all. It is the deliberate weaponization of society. Like, the source material details Geralt and Dandelion seeking shelter from a storm in the woods,
Right.
and they stumble upon a very specific type of commerce.
Yeah, they find a hawker in his wagon.
A hawker. Which, the presence of a hawker in this specific theater of war really tells us everything we need to know about the collapse of traditional supply chains.
It does, because hawkers are war profiteers.
Right.
But they occupy this very dangerous, highly lucrative niche. They are running supply lines to the Scoia'tael.
The elven guerrilla units, right?
Yeah, exactly, operating in the forests. And the Scoia'tael have capital, mostly gold and jewels they've looted from human settlements, but they are entirely cut off from the manufacturing centers.
Because they're hiding out.
Right. They can't forge steel, craft weapons, or produce medical supplies.
And so the hawker steps into that vacuum.
Yep.
But I really want to examine the sheer, unadulterated cynicism of this economic exchange for a second.
That's brutal.
Because the hawker assumes Geralt and Dandelion are elven rebels just because of the cloaks they're wearing.
Right.
And he immediately begins pitching his inventory to them. He pulls out a specific type of arrow.
Yeah.
And he doesn't just sell it as a projectile.
No, he sells the anatomical devastation it causes.
Yes. The arrowhead is heavily serrated. It's sawn through the middle. He explicitly boasts that upon entering a human body, it is designed to shatter internal organs,
To tear through teeth.
creating what the text horrifically refers to as a, quote, messy goulash.
Which is just a chilling description, and the design of that arrowhead is a perfect microcosm of the war's brutality.
How so?
Well, from a military logistics standpoint, a clean kill removes one soldier from the battlefield.
Right.
But an intentionally devastating complex wound, that removes the victim, plus the two men required to carry him.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, it places this immense demoralizing burden on the enemy's field surgeons and supply lines. The hawker isn't just selling weapons, he is selling systemic trauma.
Man, I would argue he's selling the apocalypse as a commodity.
That's a great way to put it.
Because think about it. Look at modern equivalents, right? Disaster capitalism. Black market arms dealers operating in destabilized regions today.
Exactly.
They don't look at a collapsing civilization and see a tragedy. They see an unregulated, high-margin emerging market.
An opportunity.
Right. The hawker literally swears on his children's lives that the arrows are a bargain.
While being utterly divorced from the fact that those arrows will be used to slaughter the very society his children live in.
The dissociation is just staggering.
But that dissociation shatters violently and very quickly when the macroeconomic reality of the war actually arrives at his wagon.
Oh, yeah. A Nilfgaardian raiding party intercepts the transaction.
And what does the hawker do? He attempts to pivot his opportunism.
Right. He starts bowing, offering passwords.
Trying to negotiate his survival with the new dominant force in the clearing?
But the Nilfgaardian commander doesn't negotiate.
Not at all.
He simply caves the hawker's skull in with a warhammer while his subordinates strangle the wagon driver.
It's an incredibly blunt application of force. It shuts down the hawker's complex little economic game in a single second.
But the presence of that raiding party isn't random, is it?
No, and the sources provide us with intercepted military intelligence that explains exactly why they are there.
The orders issued to the 7th Derlanian Cavalry Brigade.
Exactly. And this is where the strategy of the Southern Empire moves from typical military conquest into something much, much more insidious.
Let's get into that, because the intercepted orders outline what is basically a textbook scorched earth protocol.
But engineered with a devastating psychological component.
Right.
The cavalry is explicitly instructed not to engage in protracted sieges.
Or seek out significant points of military resistance.
Exactly. Their primary objective is the systemic terrorization of the civilian populace.
They are ordered to burn agricultural centers.
Induce mass panic.
And perform targeted eliminations just to force the surviving civilians to flee.
You really have to look at the underlying physics of that strategy. They are weaponizing the refugees.
Right, because if you drive tens of thousands of terrified, starving civilians onto the main arterial roads...
You completely clog the circulatory system of the northern kingdoms.
Precisely. Because a defending army relies on those exact same roads.
Yeah, to move heavy cavalry, siege engines, vital supply trains.
So by flooding the infrastructure with refugees, Nilfgaard effectively paralyzes the northern military response without even having to fight them directly.
The civilians become a biological barricade.
Wow. Biological barricade. That is dark.
It fundamentally alters the landscape. It obliterates any safe zones, forcing every single character into a state of hypervigilance and primal, desperate decision-making.
Which perfectly brings us to the immediate aftermath of that skirmish in the clearing.
Right.
Because Geralt, Dandelion, and Milvan actually managed to eliminate that Nilfgaardian raiding party.
Yeah, they take them out.
And in the silence that follows, they search the hawker's wagon, and they find a freshly nailed pine coffin.
And when Geralt pries it open, he doesn't find smuggled weapons.
A stolen gold.
No. He finds a young man bound and gagged.
A Nilfgaardian named Cahir.
And we really must emphasize the psychological weight of this specific individual to the listener.
Yes, please.
Because this is not just a random prisoner of war. This is the architect of the inciting incident of Geralt's entire current reality.
Right. Cahir is the man who previously attempted to abduct Ciri,
inflicting massive psychological trauma on her and setting this entire geopolitical cascade into motion.
He is the physical embodiment of everything Geralt is fighting against.
Exactly. Which is why Geralt's reaction here requires some serious scrutiny.
It really does. Because the professional killer, the man whose primary function is the elimination of threats, looks at the source of his daughter's trauma.
Cuts the man's bindings.
Places a knife on his chest and just walks away.
He gives him a weapon and leaves him alive.
I have to say, I find this strategically incomprehensible.
You do?
Yes. If you are operating in a hostile environment, intentionally leaving a known, hyper-competent hostile operative alive at your back I mean, that is a violation of basic survival mechanics.
Well, your assessment relies on the assumption that Geralt is still operating under pure tactical logic.
Which he isn't.
No, he is not. We are witnessing a profound collapse of his internal categorization system.
Okay, unpack that for me.
So, Geralt's entire worldview has historically relied on the strict binary of his profession, right? Identifying the monster and eliminating the monster.
Right, human or monster.
Exactly. And Cahir, in Geralt's mind, has occupied the category of monster for a long time.
Because of what he did to Ciri.
Right. But when he opens that coffin, he doesn't see a terrifying Imperial agent. He sees a shivering, battered human being who is shoved into a box to be sold like meat.
So the binary shatters.
Exactly.
I understand the psychological dissonance there, I really do. But leaving the knife is what bothers me.
The knife is interesting.
Right. When Milva questions the decision, Geralt deflects with this grim humor, claiming he is, quote, developing scruples and losing his edge.
Yeah.
But the knife isn't just an act of mercy. It's an invitation. He is subconsciously establishing a tether to this guy.
I would actually argue it's an imposition of agency.
How do you mean?
Well, the war strips agency from everyone. The refugees, the hawkers, the soldiers. By leaving the knife, Geralt refuses to participate in the dehumanization of a prisoner.
He forces Cahir to make a choice about his own survival.
Precisely. However, you are correct that it immediately backfires tactically.
Oh, completely backfires.
Yeah.
Because Cahir does not run away.
No, he does not.
He procures a chestnut horse and begins relentlessly shadowing Geralt's group.
Maintaining a deliberate distance, but absolutely refusing to abandon them.
And he repeatedly insists, I am not Nilfgaardian. I'm from Vicavaro. And he demands to assist them.
It creates this absurd, deeply tense dynamic where the shadow trailing them is the very nightmare Geralt is marching to defeat.
It's like a terrifying movie villain who, once unmasked, turns out to just be this lost, stubborn kid you accidentally adopted.
That is a perfect analogy.
And Geralt's insistence on walking this path alone, his desperate attempt to maintain his isolated neutrality, it just gets dismantled again almost immediately.
Because the road they're traveling on forces a collision with an entirely different approach to surviving the apocalypse.
Right. They run into Zoltan Shive and his company of dwarves.
And the environmental contrast of this encounter is vital to understand.
Paint the picture for us.
So the landscape they are navigating is a vision of absolute hell.
Yeah.
The source material describes hanging corpses swinging from trees, ruined wagons, fields reduced to ash, a sky perpetually choked with black smoke.
The visual data is purely apocalyptic.
Exactly. And moving through the center of this sheer devastation is a company of heavily armed dwarves.
Marching in time.
Hauling a wagon.
And singing boisterous marching songs.
The juxtaposition is almost hallucinatory.
It really is. I mean, you have Zoltan, this stout dwarf carrying a massive sword wrapped in catskins.
You have his gnome companion, Percival Schuttenbach, who functions as their scout and metallurgist.
You have a parrot named Field Marshal Windbag sitting on Zoltan's shoulder, just screaming profanities.
And walking amidst this heavily armed, deeply pragmatic group is a cluster of traumatized human refugee women and children that the dwarves have taken under their protection.
It's the ultimate dysfunctional road trip. A grim monster hunter, a terrified poet, a deadly archer, and a gang of singing dwarves hauling a wagon wheel and escorting refugees.
It forces Geralt's grim, brooding isolation into stark relief.
Because Geralt is internalizing the misery of the world, right?
Yeah.
He's letting it isolate him.
While Zoltan is actively pushing back against it with noise, community, and forward momentum.
But Zoltan isn't just there for comic relief.
No, not at all. He operates under a highly sophisticated, rigorously defined ethical framework that he refers to as specific good.
Let's break down that philosophy for the listener because it serves as the ideological counterweight to Geralt's neutrality.
Yeah, it's central to the whole narrative.
Zoltan openly admits that altruism is his personal vice.
He feels an undeniable compulsion to do good.
But he is a pragmatist. He looks at the macro-level destruction of the war and acknowledges that attempting to fix the world, or trying to save everyone, is a mathematical impossibility.
He equates universal altruism to pouring a drop of fresh water into a salty ocean.
It is instantly diluted and ultimately meaningless.
Right. The modern parallel here would be extreme compassion fatigue.
Oh, that makes sense.
When confronted with systemic, global-scale crises, the human brain often fails to process the sheer volume of suffering.
Right.
And the resulting psychological defense mechanism is typically paralysis or deep apathy.
You feel so insignificant in the face of the macro crisis that you just cease taking any action at all.
Exactly. And Geralt's rigid neutrality is a symptom of this.
Oh, interesting.
He claims he is neutral, but effectively he is just paralyzed by the scale of the world's cruelty.
So Zoltan's response to that paralysis is radical microethics.
Yes, he abandons the macro entirely.
He accepts that he cannot end the war or save the northern kingdoms. Instead, he focuses the entirety of his moral energy on a hyper-local radius.
He protects the specific refugee children walking next to him.
He shares his food with the specific starving poet he meets on the road.
He enacts tangible, immediate, specific good.
He essentially shrinks his moral universe down to the people he can physically reach with his hands.
Exactly. And this ideology forces Geralt into a deeply uncomfortable self-examination.
Because Geralt's detachment has yielded nothing but alienation.
Right. Zoltan's philosophy suggests that the only way to survive the crushing weight of the world is to anchor yourself to the people immediately adjacent to you.
And the validity of Zoltan's philosophy is immediately stress-tested, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The source material provides this brilliant, incredibly tense sequence that forces Geralt to apply this framework to his own profession.
The group is resting when they are interrupted by the arrival of a literal monster.
A creature known as an eye-head emerges from a woodpile.
It's described as a multi-legged, highly venomous relic of a post-conjunction ecological disaster.
And it begins moving toward the refugee children.
Now, the tension in this scene relies entirely on our expectation of Geralt's function, right? He is the professional killer of beasts.
And Zoltan immediately unstraps his prized dwarven sword and hands it to the Witcher,
fully anticipating a surgical, violent resolution.
The application of lethal force seems like the only logical outcome.
But Geralt analyzes the creature's behavioral patterns and realizes it is not acting with predatory intent.
No, it is acting out of disorientation.
So he refuses the sword.
Instead, he asks for a metal cauldron lid and a heavy ladle.
Which is incredible. Utilizing his knowledge that this specific species possesses hypersensitive auditory receptors, he essentially turns himself into a percussion instrument.
He beats the metal together with deafening force.
And the sheer acoustic trauma causes the creature to panic and retreat back into the woods. No blood is spilled.
It is a masterful subversion of his role. He resolves the encounter not through violence, but through applied biological knowledge.
The professional monster hunter uses kitchenware on the actual monster.
Right. However, the true significance of this moment only crystallizes when it is juxtaposed against an encounter that occurs just a few hours later, further down the road.
Yes, this is where it gets really dark. The group arrives at an abandoned farmstead.
And the environment is heavily contaminated.
There are bodies in a pit, indicating a severe outbreak of smallpox or some similar plague.
And while they're observing the area, a group of heavily armed human marauders rides into the farmyard.
These are likely deserters utilizing the chaos of the war to operate with absolute impunity.
Right. And they discover a surviving peasant girl hiding on the property.
They drag her into the mud and begin systematically brutalizing her.
The behavioral contrast here is absolute.
Because the biological anomaly, the quote-unquote monster, was simply disoriented and easily deterred.
But the humans are acting with deliberate, calculated malice. They are inflicting suffering purely for the sake of asserting dominance and extracting sadistic pleasure.
And Geralt's reaction here is terrifying. He doesn't hesitate.
He doesn't look for a non-lethal deterrent.
He turns to Zoltan and simply says, "Give me the sword."
He requests the sea hill, the advanced dwarven blade.
And the violence that follows is not romanticized.
No, it is an execution.
Geralt enters the farmyard and systematically dismantles the marauders. The source material emphasizes the clinical efficiency of the slaughter.
Severing hands, opening arteries.
Leaving men to bleed out in the contaminated mud, he becomes an instrument of absolute devastating retribution.
We really have to unpack the underlying psychology of this outburst.
Yeah, because Geralt is not acting as a knight-errant here. There is no economic incentive.
No one is paying him for this contract.
He is risking lethal biological exposure just by breathing the air in that yard.
And the most tragic element is that the peasant girl he saves is so deeply traumatized by the violence that she doesn't even offer gratitude.
No, she simply scrambles away in sheer terror of him.
The violence is a manifestation of his own profound psychological impotence.
Explain that.
Well, the primary driver of Geralt's entire existence at this moment is his desperate need to save Ciri.
A task he is currently failing to achieve.
Exactly. He is trapped on a road miles away from her, completely powerless. So when he sees those marauders victimizing that girl,
He channels all of his accumulated grief, rage, and helplessness into the edge of that dwarven sword.
he is aggressively imposing Zoltan's philosophy of specific good.
He cannot save his daughter,
Yeah.
so he will violently, ruthlessly alter the reality of the victim directly in front of him.
Right, he redefines the parameter of the monster.
Which proves my theory, the Witcher's real job isn't actually killing monsters. It's defining what a monster actually is.
That is exactly it. His profession isn't about exterminating non-human biology, it's about identifying and eradicating malicious intent.
The Marauders were the true monsters,
But the aftermath of this skirmish introduces another critical variable.
because one of the Marauders manages to mount a horse and attempts to flee.
And if he escapes, he brings back a larger force, which would guarantee the eradication of the entire company, including the refugee children.
So Milva, the archer, attempts to neutralize the fleeing target.
But the chaos of the environment causes her shot to miss.
The systemic threat of the entire group being exposed is literally milliseconds away from becoming a reality.
And then the flea marauder is struck down by a single gray-feathered arrow.
An arrow fired from the tree line.
An arrow fired by Kahir.
The Nilfgaardian shadow they allowed to follow them.
Kahir intervenes from a distance, neutralizing a human threat to protect the group, without revealing his position or demanding acknowledgement.
Is the ultimate vindication of Geralt's seemingly irrational decision to spare him.
The binary of the enemy completely dissolves right there.
The Nilfgaardian operative is now providing overwatch for the northern refugees.
The lines of allegiance are becoming hopelessly tangled.
Hopelessly tangled. So, realizing they are operating in an environment completely saturated with hostile human elements, the group seeks a sanctuary where marauders and armies refuse to go.
They deliberately turn off the road and enter an ancient elven cemetery known as Fen Karn.
It is a deeply atmospheric, highly superstitious location. Fog banks, ancient burial mounds, monolithic standing stones.
The dwarves are terrified, convinced the ground is crawling with ghouls.
Yet, instead of the undead, they discover an environment saturated with the scent of complex botanicals. Aniseed, wormwood, cinnamon.
And tucked among the graves is a small, meticulously organized shack.
And from this shack emerges a character who completely alters the intellectual dynamics of the group.
Emil Regis.
Emil Regis. He introduces himself as a simple barber surgeon from Dillingen, currently residing in the cemetery to harvest rare herbs.
He is described as a slim, middle-aged man with an aquiline nose dressed in unstated black clothing.
He speaks with an incredibly precise, measured vocabulary, maintaining a remarkably calming, almost hypnotic emotional baseline.
And the dramatic irony deployed by the author in this sequence is masterful.
It really is. To any listener familiar with the taxonomy of mythological creatures.
Regis is broadcasting his true nature at deafening volumes.
Literally, he resides in a graveyard.
He possesses an intimate, almost predatory understanding of human anatomy.
He politely declines to consume his own homemade alcohol.
He moves without making a sound.
He is the most obvious higher vampire in the history of literature.
Yes. But the brilliant part is that the characters, who live in a world where vampires actually exist, are completely blind to it.
They are entirely distracted by the massive alchemical distillation apparatus Regis has built inside his shack.
He is brewing a highly potent mandrake root distillate.
Moonshine. And the dwarves in Dandelion, exhausted by the trauma of the road, eagerly consume it and become heavily intoxicated.
And while the rest of the company succumbs to the alcohol, we get a profoundly revealing dialogue between Regis and Geralt.
Oh, this is fascinating.
Regis casually inhales the air near Geralt and begins detailing the Witcher's recent, highly classified medical history.
He identifies the residual scent of specific dryad healing magics in Geralt's sweat.
He deduces the exact nature of Geralt's previous injuries, a shattered femur, a compromised ulna, and warns him of impending nerve degradation.
He performs a comprehensive biometric scan using nothing but his olfactory senses.
Which immediately establishes Regis not as a creature of myth, but as a creature of intense empirical observation.
He's a scientist.
Exactly. And this sets up a brilliant thematic conflict that dominates this section of the source material.
The clash between empirical reality and human superstition.
Yes. Because as the mandrake alcohol takes effect, the group's conversation devolves into folklore.
Dandelion confidently asserts that the mandrake root is primarily used as an aphrodisiac by sorceresses.
Percival, the gnome, recounts the terrifying myth that pulling a mandrake root from the earth causes the plant to emit a scream so horrific it instantly kills the harvester.
They're enthusiastically trading in unverified, mystical dread.
And Regis, sitting calmly in the center of this, gently dismantles the superstition using chemistry and botany.
He explains the exact biological impossibility of a plant possessing vocal cords.
Then he provides the empirical mechanism for the myth.
The fresh root contains highly concentrated, volatile, toxic alkaloids.
When a human pulls it from the ground, the immediate exposure to these toxins causes severe central nervous system poisoning.
Which induces terrifying auditory hallucinations. The root isn't screaming.
The harvester's poisoned brain is simply generating the sound of a scream.
It is a masterclass in demystification.
We saw a similar dynamic earlier when Geralt assumed Zoltan's sword, the Sea Hill, was forged using magic.
Right, and the dwarves corrected him, explaining it was simply advanced metallurgy.
A soft iron core forged with hard steel edges using graphite and borax fluxes.
In this narrative universe, phenomena that the average human categorizes as magic or curses are frequently just advanced applications of engineering, chemistry, or biology that exceed the observer's intellectual capacity.
Regis embodies the triumph of logic over fear.
He really does. But his quiet, empirical sanctuary in the cemetery is a stark contrast to the absolute chaos of human superstition they are about to encounter.
Because the next day, the group leaves Fencarn and immediately walks into a massive, sprawling refugee camp.
They are only there because Milva, during an altercation, struck a peasant with enough force to cause significant cranial trauma, and they have to pay reparations, blood money.
And when they enter the camp, they find an environment that has completely fractured under the psychological strain of the war.
The center of the camp is dominated by a fanatic priest who has weaponized the refugees' terror.
He has bound a mentally challenged teenage girl to a stake, well, a wagon wheel, and is whipping the crowd into a murderous, hysterical frenzy.
Preparing to burn her alive, we really have to analyze the architecture of this demagoguery.
The priest understands that a population stripped of its homes, starved, and surrounded by plague is a powder keg of misdirected rage.
They desperately need an explanation for their suffering.
They need a scapegoat.
And the priest provides one by targeting the most vulnerable demographic available.
He utilizes virulent misogyny and xenophobia as control mechanisms.
He preaches that women are the fundamental conduits of chaos and evil, entirely subservient to carnal desires.
He explicitly accuses this disabled girl of boiling a black cat alive in order to summon a vampire,
tying the community's macro-level suffering to her supposed micro-level heresy.
And the absurdity of the accusation is highlighted by Percival.
Which is just darkly hilarious, because Percival points out that the supposedly boiled cat is currently sitting on a nearby cart.
Completely unharmed, just grooming itself.
But empirical evidence is utterly useless against a mob.
The priest isn't interested in truth. He's interested in consolidating power through the performance of divine authority.
So he initiates a trial by ordeal.
And the mechanics of the ordeal are designed to be unwinnable. It's a classic tool of inquisitorial terror.
The priest places a heavy iron horseshoe into the glowing coals of a fire until it reaches a white-hot temperature.
He declares that if anyone wishes to contest the girl's guilt, they must extract the iron from the fire with their bare hands.
If they are unburned, the girl goes free.
He is relying entirely on the assumption of human self-preservation to ensure the execution proceeds.
He assumes no one will accept permanent, agonizing physical disfigurement to save a stranger.
But he completely miscalculates the variables of the group standing in front of him.
Because Regis steps forward.
The mild-mannered barber surgeon politely asks the crowd to cease their prayers.
He walks to the fire, reaches his bare hand directly into the glowing coals, extracts the white-hot iron, and holds it aloft.
He smiles at the priest.
His flesh is completely unmarred.
It is an exquisite subversion of power.
Let's look at the historical parallels here for the listener.
Right. Think of crisis-induced scapegoating, the witch trials of early modern Europe, where communities under extreme socioeconomic stress murdered marginalized individuals.
Usually those narratives feature ordinary rational people standing by helplessly, while zealots operate with impunity.
But here, the individuals using logic and power to save the innocent are the very beings the mob considers monsters.
A mutant witcher, a dwarf, and a literal higher vampire are the ethical center of the scene.
Exactly. And Regis doesn't use his supernatural physiology to tear the priest apart or drink his blood.
He uses his thermal resilience to completely dismantle the epistemological foundation of the priest's authority.
He beats the fanatic using the fanatic's own rigged game.
He forces the mob to release the girl. It's this moment of profound victory.
But the reality of the geopolitical landscape refuses to allow the victory to settle.
Because at that exact moment, a massive Nilfgaardian cavalry unit breaches the camp's perimeter.
The ideological debate is instantly crushed by the physical reality of the war.
The military charge triggers an absolute stampede.
The structural integrity of the camp disintegrates. Tents collapse, wagons are overturned, and thousands of panicked refugees surge in every direction.
And Geralt, attempting to shield Dandelion from the crush, is violently swept up in the chaos.
He is struck by a falling wagon, trampled beneath the hooves of the cavalry and the boots of the mob, and loses consciousness.
And here, the source material executes a staggering structural pivot.
Because while Geralt's body is being ground into the mud, the narrative perspective violently shifts thousands of miles away, across the continent, to the person he is destroying himself to save.
Ciri.
This perspective shift forces us to confront the massive informational deficit driving Geralt's actions.
Throughout this grueling journey, Geralt has clung to a highly specific, comforting hallucination.
He has repeatedly vocalized to his companions that he believes Ciri is currently residing in the Nilfgaardian capital.
He envisions her sleeping on damask sheets, eating off silver platters, being treated as a pampered, captive political pawn destined to marry the emperor.
That vision is the psychological engine keeping him moving.
But the reality the text reveals is a complete inversion of that assumption.
Ciri is nowhere near Nilfgaard.
She's not a captive princess.
She is operating in the lawless borderlands, running with a highly lethal, nihilistic gang of teenage bandits known as the Rats.
She has completely abandoned her royal identity, adopting the pseudonym Falca.
We must deeply analyze the psychological mechanism of this transformation.
Right, because Ciri is a victim of profound, repeated trauma.
Her kingdom was slaughtered, she was hunted by Cahir, she survived a barren desert, and she has been repeatedly stripped of all agency.
So integrating with the Rats and adopting the persona of Falca is a radical trauma response.
It is a psychological defense mechanism. By embracing violence, by becoming the aggressor, she is desperately attempting to reclaim control over her environment.
The source material illustrates this through an incredibly kinetic, mesmerizing sequence.
The Rats have commandeered a village barn for a local dance.
The text describes the frantic, feverish rhythm of fiddles and bagpipes. Ciri's in the center of it, wearing heavy makeup, stomping her boots, dancing furiously with her companion, Missile.
It is a portrait of complete, intoxicating abandon. She is trying to obliterate her memories through sheer physical exertion and adrenaline.
But the narrative establishes that her attempt to sever her ties to her past is futile, because she shares a profound, almost somatic link with Geralt.
As she dances in a frenzy of violent freedom, she is simultaneously registering the catastrophic physical damage being inflicted on Geralt's body in the refugee camp.
Later that evening, she wakes screaming in terror, telling Missile that she experienced the sensation of being crushed beneath horses.
She literally felt the agonizing pressure in her own skull and knee.
It is a devastating juxtaposition. Geralt is getting his bones broken, driven by the false belief that his daughter is safe in a golden cage.
While Ciri, hardened into a killer, is experiencing his physical agony as a nightmare.
The tragedy of their mutual lack of context is profound. But Geralt doesn't have the luxury of understanding this.
No. When he finally regains consciousness after the stampede, his situation has deteriorated from chaotic to fatal.
He awakens to find that he and Dandelion have been detained.
But they are not prisoners of the Nilfgaardian Empire.
They have been captured by the armed forces of the northern kingdoms. Specifically, troops from Temeria and Sintra, commanded by Marshal Visigurd.
They are in the custody of the very faction Geralt ostensibly supports.
And Visigurd's immediate, unequivocal order is that Geralt must be hanged.
This requires serious geopolitical dissection.
Yeah, let's unpack that. Why would a commander of the Northern Allied forces order the summary execution of a witcher who has spent the last several weeks slaughtering Nilfgaardian raiding parties?
To understand Visigurd's logic, we have to look at the weaponization of information in a theater of war.
Okay.
Visigurd is commanding an army that relies heavily on Sintran loyalists. These are soldiers fighting a desperate, grueling campaign with the core motivation of liberating their homeland and restoring their rightful monarch, Ciri, to the throne.
Their morale is entirely dependent on the ideological purity of their cause.
But Nilfgaardian intelligence has launched a devastating psychological warfare campaign.
They have flooded the continent with the rumor that Ciri is voluntarily residing in Nilfgaard and is betrothed to the Emperor.
Exactly. From the perspective of a Sintran infantryman freezing in the mud, this information is fatal to morale.
If the queen they are dying for is willingly sleeping with the architect of their destruction, the entire premise of their sacrifice is rendered meaningless.
The military cohesion of Visigurd's forces begins to disintegrate. Desertion rates skyrocket.
So Visigurd has to employ radical historical revisionism.
He recognizes that he cannot disprove the rumor of Ciri's presence in Nilfgaard, so instead he attacks the legitimacy of Ciri herself.
He initiates a counter-propaganda campaign claiming that Ciri's royal bloodline is tainted,
That her lineage is impure.
and that she is an illegitimate bastard with no legal claim to the throne of Sintra.
He is deliberately attempting to obliterate the legacy of the royal family. He swore an oath to protect, purely to maintain operational control over his troops.
It is a masterclass in political pragmatism overriding loyalty. The truth is no longer a virtue. It is a critical vulnerability.
And Geralt is the ultimate liability to Visigurd's fabricated narrative.
Because Geralt possesses first-hand empirical knowledge of Ciri's true lineage.
He was physically present when her parents were betrothed. He knows the counterpropaganda is a lie.
Visigurd calculates that if Geralt is allowed to live and speak the truth, the fragile ideological scaffolding holding his army together will collapse.
Therefore, Geralt must hang, not for any crime committed, but simply to bury the truth and preserve the lie.
It is the ultimate manifestation of Geralt's failed neutrality.
He refused to engage in the politics of kings, but the politics of kings have ensnared him anyway, condemning him to death for the sheer inconvenience of his knowledge.
He is bound, helpless, waiting for the gallows. He cannot fight his way out of this political trap.
But the sheer chaotic momentum of the war refuses to allow him to die a quiet, bureaucratic death.
Because the front lines of the conflict violently shift directly onto Visigurd's position.
This brings us to the climatic sequence of the source material.
The Battle of the Bridge.
The military staging ground is a critical bridge over a massive river.
Without warning, a massive, highly organized Nilfgaardian vanguard strikes the bridgehead.
The assault is overwhelming. The northern troops are instantly pushed back into a defensive posture.
The infrastructure catches fire. In the sheer, deafening confusion of the melee, the lines holding Geralt are severed.
He is suddenly a free agent in the middle of a slaughter.
But he does not use this freedom to escape.
The crush of bodies, the sheer density of the combat, forces him directly toward the frontline defense of a burning barricade.
He is handed a sword, and the instinctual, kinetic reality of survival overrides any grand philosophical stance.
He begins commanding the defense of the bridge to prevent the Nilfgaardian heavy cavalry from crossing.
And we must look at the specific composition of the forces fighting shoulder to shoulder with him in the smoke.
He is not fighting alongside the northern knights who condemned him.
No. He is fighting alongside Zoltan, Percival, and the Dwarven mercenaries.
And, most incredibly, fighting beside him is Cahir.
The Nilfgaardian intelligence officer.
Yes. The man who started the entire nightmare.
Cahir throws himself into the meat grinder of the bridge defense, actively slaughtering his own imperial countrymen to protect Geralt's flank.
It is the ultimate collapse of every preconceived category.
We have to emphasize the profound thematic shift occurring on that bridge.
For the entire duration of this journey, Geralt has wielded his Witcher's neutrality as a psychological shield.
He insisted he was a detached observer, merely passing through the war to fulfill a personal objective.
But on that barricade, covered in ash and blood, screaming orders over the din of clashing steel, the shield of neutrality entirely incinerates.
He is dragged into the current. He ceases to be a monster hunter operating above the fray.
He becomes a soldier.
He becomes a human being fighting for his life in a human war, relying on the unwavering support of the exact enemy who initiated his quest.
The fires of the bridge completely melt down the binary logic of his past. The labels of friend, foe, human, and monster are obliterated by the blunt force trauma of shared survival.
He becomes an accidental hero for an army that moments prior intended to execute him.
Fighting in coordination with an agent of the Empire, he is marching to defeat.
The irony is absolute, but the transformation is necessary. He realizes that isolation is a death sentence.
Which leaves us with a critical framework to apply to our own understanding of conflict.
Let's pose this to the listener. Why does the friction of the journey permanently alter our fundamental composition before we ever reach the destination?
Geralt set out as an absolute isolationist to rescue a specific girl from a specific emperor.
Yet, long before he even nears his geographic goal, the pressure of the environment forces him to assemble a profoundly strange family.
To use his lethal skills to enact specific hyperlocal good.
And to trust his life to the very man he considered his greatest enemy.
It demonstrates that our rigid internal categories, our definitions of who we are, who our adversaries are, and what our ultimate mission is, are rarely robust enough to survive contact with the complex, messy reality of a systemic crisis.
Survival demands adaptation, and adaptation requires genuine connection, often with the most unlikely variables in the equation.
It forces you to evaluate your own Hansa, the term Geralt ultimately adopts for his bizarre company.
Look at the architecture of your own life. When the systemic machinery of your reality breaks down, who are the oddballs, the supposed adversaries, or the unexpected allies that step into the breach?
Who are the people who pull you out of the paralyzing macro dread and help you execute the specific good required to survive the day?
Those connections are the only true defense against the crushing weight of a chaotic world.
Exactly the mechanism we need to remember.
Thank you for joining us on this exhaustive deep dive into the source material. When the environment is burning and the rigid binaries of our understanding completely fail, remember that the most fatal mistake is attempting to walk through the fire alone.
You survive by walking through it together.